Hello again, everybody. So, for the same reason as in the book of the New Testament, the survey class, we're doing this class number 8 in Daniel as a recording. So, I'm going to go ahead and do the review class that I was going to do last because I think it lends itself to the format a little bit better. I'm going to do a review. Most everything you'll hear we've already done in the rest of the classes, but this is just a way of sort of summarizing up the things that we have learned and the things that are most important about where things are going. Um, Remember that some of the things that we've tried to show throughout this is that the chronology is outstandingly accurate. It's accurate down to incredible detail, and that the only reason people have trouble with it is because we just don't believe it. We don't think what it says is true. And if you just take the Bible, take it for what it says, it's amazingly accurate. Number two, we learned that Daniel was an incredibly righteous man. This was a person who, very similarly to Joseph, was sent ahead of his people. He made a way for them, even though God, in his wrath against their sin, sent them into captivity. He sent ahead some people that were righteous before him, and they paved the way because Daniel became a leader in Babylon. He was also a leader in the Medo-Persian Empire. His three friends, Azariah, Hananiah, Mishael, they were also leaders in Babylon. They stood for him. They stood for him in multiple ways. We saw all of those. They were cast in a fiery furnace. Daniel was thrown under the Medo-Persians into a lion's den, but they stood true to God in everything that they did, righteous in all their ways, shown to be such even under incredible persecution. And what we see is a people of Israel that they did well in Babylon. They prospered, and they were blessed because God's blessings. I mean, He wants to overtake us with blessings, and we see that. The second thing we see about Daniel is that he paved the way, just as it was prophesied by Jeremiah in the book of Kings, that there would be some of them taken as eunuchs. He was taken. That prophecy was there. They went before them. Incredible part of the book that is often misunderstood or overlooked. And then the third thing is that the vision after vision is about the last days. Daniel said and testified he wanted to know more about those last days. King Nebuchadnezzar testified that when he had his first vision, the dream that he didn't tell anybody what it was, and then God showed the same dream to Daniel, that dream, he was looking into what's going to happen in the future, what's going to be end of days, how are things going to happen. In other words, he was numbering his days, seeing there was going to come an end, and he was applying his heart to know wisdom. He wanted to understand it. I mean, it's just, God is so merciful and so loving. He gives wisdom to whosoever asks him, and he does not upbraid them. The only reason we have trouble is because of sin. And when we give ourselves to sin and give ourselves to our own way, it works in us corruption, and therefore we cannot fulfill. Daniel did not give himself to that. He gave himself to the worship of God, commitment before God. We saw that his three friends did the same. We talked about the prayer of Azariah and the Song of the Three that's in the Old Testament Apocrypha, such a wonderful thing. My favorite part being when they said, look, we have no sin offering. We have no place to offer an offering. We have none of those things, God, but we come before you with a broken spirit and a contrite heart. That is what God desires. That is the altar that He really desires. That is what it's all about. Circumcision of the heart was something God was interested in from Deuteronomy, if not all the way before. So that's just the quickie summary, and then we're going to look through these chapter by chapter. We're going to talk about the various visions. They're very simple when you break them down like this. There's a lot of detail in them, which I hope that we touched on in the individual classes. But this is to prepare you for the test. So I'm going to tell you right now what the test will be. The test is basically going to be this. I want you to go through the book of Daniel, and I want you to be able to pull out the salient points about who the Antichrist is and where he's coming from, and be able to write in just a few paragraphs how that is shown. It doesn't have to be a work of a dissertation. One of the things I think I might show you on the last class is a dissertation that somebody did on a particular subject. And I just want you to get an idea of what a high-level academic dissertation looks like. But this is not meant to be that. This is just a basic, simple thing to where you could be able to take somebody in the book of Daniel and show them things that are true, that you know are true, that you know the Word of God, that you can demonstrate very simply. And I want you to do it in 2 or 3, maybe 4 paragraphs. There's no length requirement. I'm very into succinctness. I like, say it in as few words as possible that is accurate, but don't say it in so few that you leave so much out. Just finding that balance place. But we're not going to hold all of you to just way. Be yourself. Say the things God shows you. What have you seen in Daniel? What do you understand about the last days, about the Antichrist? And I'll be commenting on many of those. So out of this particular class, you should be able to do that pretty easily. Okay, so it began in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim, king of Judah. The final king that Judah had, it was his 3rd year, and Nebuchadnezzar comes and besieges Jerusalem, and he takes a bunch of guys away. And we learn of who they are that are among them. Among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They were given new names: Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which is how so many people know them. If you watch VeggieTales, it's Rack, Shack, and Benny. You know how it goes. But Daniel purposed in his heart not to defile himself. He was going to stay true to God and let God be his blessing. God was going to be his protector. He was not going to violate the word of God. He was not going to violate the ways of God. He was going to do what God told him to do. And they were going to be given meat, probably meat offered to idols and various other things. They just were going to refuse it, because either they didn't know where it came from, or they knew that it was offered to idols, or they knew that it was meat that God had told them not to eat in the keeping of the law as they understood it. And so they stand before God, and they have this testimony that the person who was set over them, that the prince of them, loved Daniel. And we see that throughout his life, that the people who interact with him, they come to love him. Why? Because he is the soul of humility. He is the soul of setting himself before God. He's the soul of saying, I bless you and not curse you. I mean, this is who Daniel is, and that he's constant, and I am certain that he came across as loving these people and blessing these people, even though he was a man in captivity, just like Joseph, who had similar testimonies that he was just loved of God and blessed of God, and he loved the people around him and blessed them, and was the best worker and the best leader and the best idea maker, and the one who took nothing for himself but looked for the needs of others. But we go on. Verse 20 of chapter 1, in all matters of wisdom and understanding, the king inquired of them. He found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. And Daniel continued even unto the 1st year of King Cyrus. So we're going to see at the end of the book, just the chronology is that throughout Babylon, I gave you a very detailed timeline of the life of Nebuchadnezzar and those that followed him, and the life of Babylon. And when Cyrus comes, it's basically about Daniel. Daniel is a young man when he gets taken to Babylon. He lives throughout that Babylonian empire for many years. He's a very old man when Cyrus takes over, and he lived all the way through that. He continued unto the 1st year of King Cyrus, which is when he would have died. So, in the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, he dreamed a dream. And we talked about the fact that his 2nd year begins after the 3rd year that Daniel was taken away, because he started out as the crown prince who was working for his father. But when his father died, he became the king of Babylon. And so his 2nd year of reign of king of Babylon is not the same as 2 years after he went and conquered Jerusalem, so that you understood that. And we talked about that in detail. And there's a thing. So Daniel and his friends have just graduated from the get to be a Chaldean soothsayer class. How do you get to be an advisor to the king class? They've just graduated from this, and suddenly they find out that they're going to die, because all the people in their class are going to be killed, because Nebuchadnezzar saw a dream and he told them to interpret it. They couldn't interpret it because he didn't tell them what the dream was. They could have made up an interpretation if he told them what the dream was, but they didn't have the dream nor the interpretation. And so he said to kill them all. And Daniel and his 3 friends who just graduated, suddenly they're a part of it. Not a lot of fun. But did they despair? No. They went to another man who loved them and was over them, and said, give me some time. And so they took the time. I mean, it's just such a wonderful story. And then Daniel goes to God. He prays to God. Beautiful prayer, just a prayer of humility, a prayer of confidence, a prayer of faith, believing that God would do what he said he would do. And then he gets it, and he gets the dream and the interpretation. And you all remember what the dream was of. It was a very large statue with a head of gold, arms and chest of silver, bellies and thighs of brass, then legs of iron, and then feet of iron with toes of iron mixed with clay. The feet and toes are iron mixed with clay. And then out of a place comes a mountain, a rock that is cut out without hands, and the king of all shall the God of heaven sets up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And it comes down, it blows up the statue at the feet, and then crushes the whole thing to powder, helping us to understand again that all of them are connected. They're all a part of the same wickedness. God was going to crush it all. And Daniel gives that dream and interpretation, and tells Nebuchadnezzar, "You're the head of gold. You are. You're the king. You're the guy. You're the one." The kings after him, after he died, his sons down to his grandsons, they were weak men. They were not great men in the kingdom, and they lost everything through their mismanagement and all the things that they did. And that's another historical thing. So chapter 3 is when King Nebuchadnezzar makes an image. Makes an image. So basically he says, well, if I'm the head of gold and I saw this image in a dream, I'm going to make one. And then I'm going to tell everybody they have to bow down to it. What a great idea. So he does it. And then the 3 children of Israel just said, I know that we're leaders. We were made leaders by you because of our work with Daniel and when this dream was interpreted. But they don't care. You're not bowing to the image, so we're going to throw you in a fiery furnace. And Nebuchadnezzar is very rageful because they do it to his face. They're given an opportunity. They're given an opportunity to repent. They're given an opportunity to change their mind. No, we're not going to bow down, O king. We would bow down to God alone. We'll do a lot of things for you. We'll do what you ask us to do, but we are not going to bow down to your image. So they throw us in the fiery furnace, and what happens? They have a great and mighty deliverance. They are freed in the furnace. We read some of the Song of the Three, and you can find it and read it in detail. It's just absolutely amazing how it happened. And there was a 4th man that shows up in there, like unto the Son of Man, the Son of God. His 4th is like the Son of God. And it's just glorious. And most people know some version of that story. There's a lot to be said about it. And we did that back at the, when we did that in the class. So at that point, chapter 4, verse 1, Nebuchadnezzar begins to glorify God. He begins to recognize God is God. He begins to glorify him. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders, his kingdom's an everlasting kingdom, his dominions from generation to generation. And he's at rest, and he sees visions and upon his bed, and everybody comes and he tells them the dream, but they can't tell him the interpretation. And so at last Daniel came in. Good old Daniel. He comes, whose name was Belteshazzar, and he gives him the interpretation. And remember, at the interpretation, just simply, we talked about it in detail, simply was that he was going to become with a heart like a beast. He was going to, have 7 times or 7 years pass over him. And that is borne out in the historical record that there's a period of time when Nebuchadnezzar just kind of goes silent. But he was so great, so feared, so mighty that even though he had this mania upon him where everything was just wrong in his life, he wasn't deposed as the king. And then he sets up, at the end of that time, he sets back up on his feet and declares that God is God. Daniel's God is God. And everything goes on. And that's just a huge part of what this is about. What is Daniel doing? He is testifying of who his God is. He's testifying the love of his God. He's testifying the mercy of his God. He's testifying of the wisdom of his God. And he's the one that makes known things that shall come to pass. And we talked about how the fact that Nebuchadnezzar wants to look at the end, Daniel wants to look at the end. Why? They want to understand the wisdom of the thing. They want to see the end of this world, because this world is in bondage to sin. And yet God is going to bring that sin to an end. And that's the important thing. Verse 37 of chapter 4, I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth, his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride he is able to abase. Because that's what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. God set him in a place where he could be very, very prideful. But God allowed him to be abased. Very, very powerful. I'm going to do a little bit more of this just to go over it, because in chapter 5, Belshazzar the king. Now, Belshazzar comes long after Nebuchadnezzar. There's a number of different kings between him and Nebuchadnezzar. He's a distant relative, and he is the regent of Babylon. This is very important because for a long time people made fun of the Bible because there was no King Belshazzar in Babylon. Oh, yes, there was. The king at that time was kind of an absentee king. He spent a lot of time in Arabia, and we talked about that. And Belshazzar was the regent, and in more modern times, people have figured out, yeah, absolutely, there's evidence that that's true. And this was Belshazzar. And so Belshazzar is having a feast. And in that feast, they brought golden vessels taken out of the temple of the house of God, which is at Jerusalem. And the king and his princes, his wives, his concubines, they drank from them. They drank wine, praised the gods of gold and of silver and of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. And in the same hour, the forth comes the fingers of a man's hand, and right over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. So you just see this hand, and it goes over to the wall, and it begins to write. And the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts were very troubled. The joints of his loins were loosed. What does that basically mean? Basically means he wet himself, and his knees smote one against another. I mean, we're talking about fear. You just try to sit in a room, you're praising the gods of gold, and suddenly the finger of somebody's hand shows up in your house and starts writing on the wall. I mean, that's pretty amazing. And the king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the soothsayers. The king spoke and said to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and shows me interpretation thereof shall be clothed with scarlet, have a chain of gold about his neck, and be third ruler in the kingdom. Then came in all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof. Then was King Belshazzar greatly troubled. His countenance was changed in him. His lords were astonished. I mean, he's just freaked out, as we would say it these days. Now the queen. This is his mother, or maybe his grandmother. But by reason of the words of the king and his lords came unto the banquet house, and the king spake and said, O king. The queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. There is a man in thy kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods, and in the days of thy father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar, thy father, the king, I say, thy father, made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. For as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams, and showing of hard sentences, and dissolving of doubts were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. So they brought Daniel. He's a pretty old guy at this point, probably in some sort of forced retirement in a sense. That's why he wasn't the first guy brought out. I've even heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. And so all these people have come, and they can't read it. And Daniel said to the king, let thy gifts be to thyself. Give thy rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing unto the king, and make known to him the interpretation. O thou king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom, and majesty, and glory, and honor. I just want to comment, it's saying it's his father. It's not, Belshazzar's father is not Nebuchadnezzar, but he is his ancestor. And that's really what it's talking about here. His father, a kingdom, a majesty, glory, and honor. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed. Whom he would be, kept alive. And whom he set up. And whom he would, he put down. And when his heart was lifted up, and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. This is why this story follows right after the story of Nebuchadnezzar's mania, as I call it. Because it's coming off the same thing. It's the same place that it is in the narrative of understanding the pride of kings, and God sets up and God puts down, and God has a purpose for it, right? Because his mind, verse 20, is hardened in pride. So he was driven from the sons of men. His heart made like the beasts. His dwelling with the wild asses. They fed him with grass like oxen. His body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointeth over it whomsoever he will. In other words, he had no doubt about who God was, and we saw that in chapter 4 at the end of it. And thou, his son, his descendant, O Belshazzar, you've not humbled thy heart, though you knew all this. Wow. But you lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your lords and your wives and your concubines have drunk wine in them, and you've praised the gods of silver and gold and brass and iron wood and stone, which they don't see, they don't hear, they don't know, and the God in whose hand thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways, you have not glorified him. Oh, shall we just glorify him and give thanks to him? Then was the part of the hand sent from him, and this is the writing that was written. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. This is the interpretation of the thing. Mene, God has numbered thy kingdom and finished it. And he said that twice. Tekel, you are weighed in the balances and are found wanting. Peres, which is a root word of the Upharsin. Thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then commanded Belshazzar, they clothed Daniel with scarlet, put a chain of gold about his neck, made a proclamation concerning him. He should be the third ruler in the kingdom, which actually works out kind of good because he's going to sort of take over when Darius the Mede shows up. In that night, that very night, was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain, and Darius the Mede took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So Darius the Mede is an old guy. I may go into it next week, but I'm convinced that Darius the Mede, I am convinced that he is Cyaxares' son, Astyages, would be known as Astyages II, a king of the Medes, and he was actually a higher king than Cyrus the Persian, who became Cyrus the Great, and was prophesied by God that he would be who he was. This Darius the Mede. Now, there have been lots of discussion, lots of arguments about who Darius the Mede was or wasn't. Many people have said he didn't exist. For many years, now people are convinced that he did exist, which is because the Bible was right all along. The question has always been who he was, and many people have put down many theories, but I am absolutely convinced in all the research I've done that he is Astyages II, or Cyaxares II. I'll get that right next week, and we'll make sure we got that laid out for you, of who he is. But he should be the third ruler, and Darius took the kingdom. And what happened historically is that the conquering of Babylon was not one where there was a big army fight. Basically, they diverted the entire river, the Euphrates River, and then they crossed over on land and just walked in because they were not expecting an attack, and there had been a work in diplomacy and whatever that essentially there were Babylonians inside the city. They didn't like Belshazzar. They just handed it over to Darius the Mede, and he took over. It wasn't bloodless, but it was nearly so, and certainly in comparison to other things that people did to cities in those days, it was a bloodless takeover. And that's why that very night, and then they took Belshazzar and killed him. That's what you do with the king that's ruling over your enemy. Chapter 6, Darius set over the kingdom 120 princes, and then he over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first. So notice, he was third in the kingdom. He was glorious. People knew who he was. Darius moved in, and he kept Daniel in he made him a big guy. And at this point, they all assembled together and tried to find a way to get rid of Daniel, because they were jealous of Daniel. They didn't like him. He was a Jew that came from that far off place, and he was a Babylonian guy trained in the Babylon. There's all kinds of reasons people were jealous of him, and so they found a way. The only way to get him was not by finding some evil. They couldn't find a skeleton in his closet or find pictures of him going in and out of the strip club or whatever else they do these days to politicians to try to demean them and run them down or give them accusations, real or imagined, about what they did when they were whenever. They couldn't find anything in Daniel. There was nothing to be found. They couldn't even find anybody to falsely testify against him that would even work. So they had to get him for doing the one thing he would never violate, and that was seeking his God every day. and you know the story of what happened. And because of that, Daniel was thrown into a den of lions, and he comes out unhurt and comes out well. And that is just a glorious story. So we've got the fiery furnace, we got Nebuchadnezzar saying that God is God because he abases even those who their heart is hardened by pride. Is that not mercy? And then we have Belshazzar, even though he had been known these things, he'd probably been told these things about who God was, he didn't care. He praised the idols, and therefore his kingdom was taken from him and it was given to Darius the Mede. And then under Darius the Mede, they get Daniel for being a good guy. They get Daniel for serving God. They persecute him for seeking his God, and they throw him in the lion's den, and that took care of it. And then verse 28 says, this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. In other words, there are two different reigns. And we understand what happened. Darius the Persian took over. He was king there for a year, maybe close to two. And then he died, and he was taken over by Darius. And then Darius became the king of kings of all the Medo-Persian Empire. And then in the first year of Darius is when he commands that Jews can go back home, or the first year of Cyrus. Okay. So that's the story of Daniel. That's really most of it right there. The rest of it is Daniel seeing visions and dreams, and we're seeing what he looks for. So chapter 7, verse 1 tells you when the dream was. This is the first year of Belshazzar in Babylon. And Daniel's an old man now. He's lived through this Babylon Empire. We've had the dream of the king, and he knows there's going to be a great kingdom of God that's going to crush everything. He knows that there's going to be 4 successive kingdoms that are going to be talked about. And he sees this. He sees 4 great beasts, and we talked about them. We've got the lion with eagle's wings. We've got the bear that hunches up on one side and chews on 3 ribs. We've got the leopard with wings that's, implying goes so fast, and the great and terrible beast. And then in the night visions, a 4th beast, verse 7, strong exceedingly, with iron teeth, so liking it to the iron kingdom of the legs, devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it. It was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and there came up another horn, so number 11. And another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. And I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, his hair, his head like the pure wool, his throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were open. I beheld then, because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake, I beheld even till the beast was slain, and his body destroyed, and given to the burning flame. Wow. As concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and time. I saw in the night visions, behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him, and there was given unto him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which will not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. Absolutely amazing. I'm grieved. We spent some time talking about that. I hope that we touched on most of the things. You see what's going on there. That very much speaks of the book of Revelation, because who is this? The Ancient of Days is sitting, but who's this one that comes like the Son of Man with the clouds of heaven? That's Jesus. This is him. And what is the revelation? It's the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave to Jesus, who then gave it to John, who then gave it to the churches. Verse 15, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit, in the midst of my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. And I came near to one of them that stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me, and he taught me the interpretation. He talked about the four. We said the Bible interprets itself. You don't need to do it. Here they are. Here's the four kings that will arise out of the earth. We talked about that. That's also the same as kingdoms. And then what does he want to know? I want to know the truth of the fourth one. I want to know more about this fourth one. In Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the fourth one was like this iron kingdom, but at the end is like iron mixed with clay, right? Then it's being represented by this terrible beast with 10 horns. And Daniel's going, I want to know about that. What's going on there? I wanted to know, verse 19, the truth of the fourth beast, diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful. Teeth are of iron, nails of brass, devoured, break in pieces, stamped the residue with his feet. And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and the other which came up, before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes, and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. There's a wickedness to this king that is just beyond everybody else. I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 horns that will arise, and another shall arise after them, shall be different from the first 10, and he shall subdue 3 kings, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. And we've often said that is 3.5 times or 3.5 years, and when you get to Revelation, that fits with the Revelation quite well. The judgment shall sit, they shall take away his dominion to consume and to destroy it unto the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations much troubled me, and my countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart. So but what is he interested in? This end thing has really got him. He's seeing an end to sin. He's seeing an end to oppression. He's seeing an end to wickedness. And it enamors him. It grits his heart. He wants this. So a couple years later, in the 3rd year of Belshazzar, he sees another one. And we spent a fair amount of time on this one. This is the one where you've got in the east. Get right on this thing. In the east over here, as you're looking at it, as you look at a map, it's to your right. In the east is this ram with 2 horns, one that's a little bit higher than the other. And then coming out of the west is the he-goat with the big one notable horn out of his head. And he comes and he stamps upon that one and destroys it. And then it tells you the interpretation. And he says, the ram is the kings of Media and Persia. The rough he-goat's the king of Greece. The great horn between his eyes is the first king. There he goes. And we say that is Alexander the Great. And I've never seen anybody that really disagrees. And he's going to go forth, and he's going to do this, and it's pretty intense. And so what is Daniel seeing? He's at the beginning of the Medo-Persian Empire. This is all going to happen at the end of it. Daniel's long gone by the time this happens. And in the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of the seed of the Medes, this is Darius the Mede, by the way, which was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans. In the first year of his reign, Daniel, understood by books. So now we've gone actually backwards again. We're back to when the Medo-Persians, we have gone forward. The Medo-Persians have taken over here. And Daniel's looking at the books. Whose books is he looking at? He's looking at the book of Jeremiah. Because in the first year of his reign, I understood by books the number of the years whereof the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years. So when is this happening? This is when Babylon's now gone. It's been taken over by the Medes and the Persians. The king of the Medes, Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, who we'll talk about more next week. This king, during his time, Jeremiah says there's going to be 70 years in the desolation of Jerusalem. And Daniel understands we're really close to this. Because when do you start counting from? And I told you can start at 609 with the last king, and when they begin to be oppressed in a certain way, and King Josiah is gone. And so I use 609 because it's easier for me to remember, because Babylon got conquered by the Medes and Persians in 539, and that's 70 years. But I'm really of the mind that it's probably closer to 606, not 609, because that's when Daniel gets taken captive. That's when Nebuchadnezzar enters the picture. And if that's the case, that fits with the fact that Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, known as Darius the Mede, is the king of Babylon when Belshazzar is deposed and the Babylonians are conquered by the Medes and Persians. He's actually king for a year to two. And by the time Cyrus takes over, and it's his first year, when he makes the decree, it's 537/536. So we're in that, right in that tail end. Daniel's understanding by books going, we're right at that time. It's not late, it's right on time. And he set his face to understand, and then God comes and shows him. He gives him the 70 weeks, and we talked about the 70 weeks, and we're going to talk about it in more detail next week. We talk about Ezra and Nehemiah and some of the other things to help you to understand that. But what's the focus of it? Until Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, 62 weeks, the street being built again, and the wall even in troublous times. And after the 62 weeks or 62 weeks, Messiah is going to be cut off, but not for himself. That's a glorious statement. Talk about minimizing the greatness of that. Messiah is going to be cut off. Oh, he died for you and me that we might die with him, be raised up for him. He didn't die for himself, he died for us. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. Who's the prince that shall come? That's the Antichrist. The people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end will be with a flood. Until the end of the war, desolations are determined. Remember, the abomination that makes desolate is an important thing, and I gave you all those scriptures that you can look at them, and Jesus talked about it. He shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he will cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. For the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Absolutely amazing, absolutely incredible, just intense. That this is going to happen. And so this is the stuff. Remember, Daniel's very interested in this end. This is why in the test, what I want you to do is basically prove where the Antichrist is coming from, because it's the focus of when the end is going to be. And a big part of it's going to be this understanding of the 70 weeks. It's going to be an understanding of the 70 years that Jeremiah talked about, and etc. Chapter 10, in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, something's revealed to Daniel, who's called Belteshazzar. And he looked and he sees a vision. I looked at my eyes and I saw a man, verse 5, clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz. His body was like the beryl. His face is the appearance of lightning. His eyes as lamps of fire. His arms and his feet like in color to polished brass. And the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude. And Daniel's the only one who saw it. Everybody else knew there was a great quaking, and they hid themselves. And so I was left alone, and somebody touched him, and he gets a revelation of what's going on in the heavens. So, Michael and Gabriel and the prince of Persia and the prince of Grecia and how that they warred and fought in the spirit up in the heavenlies, and the things that we just cannot speak particularly of. And then I'm going to show you. And then what happens, and we spent a fair amount of time on this in the last class or two, is detailed information about what happens after the prince of Grecia comes. After that first king and that horn got broken off, 4 horns came out from it, one of which also had a little horn that came out of it, very like the little horn that came from outside the 10 kings, very much like that. Incredible story. And this occurs to give us details about what is the world going to be like and how are we going to come to the end of wickedness. And he sees, what did he see? He says a vision of Jesus that is very, very much like the vision that John sees in the first chapter of the book of the Revelation of Jesus Christ. So Daniel set you up for it. And then we talked about the detail of what goes on here with the king of the north and the king of the south, all of which is refining an understanding of who the king of the north is. The king of the north is a ruler in the territory that we would know of as the Assyrian Empire, that we would know of as the extended Babylonian Empire, that we would know of as the piece of the Grecian Empire, the most eastern part of the Grecian Empire, then became the Seleucid kingdom after the wars of the successors of Alexander the Great, and he became, and his descendants, the king of the north, and one of them even went to the temple of the people of God and desolated it, at which case became the Maccabees, which we've mentioned a number of times, but we haven't talked about in thoroughness about what went on with the Maccabees, but you can read about it in 1st and 2nd Maccabees in the Apocrypha, the Old Testament Apocrypha, but it's a historical story. It's well attested to. The big issue with the Seleucid kingdoms at these times is they basically get crushed by Rome. That's really what happens. That's the great and terrible beast that just stamps on everything and just destroys it. And so we talked in detail about the Seleucid kingdom, how much these prophecies were very specific. I gave you another timeline that broke down the Seleucid kingdom. There's a lot more detail to be had. I just ended it with the civil wars that began after Antiochus IV Epiphanes. I changed it to, just said civil wars because you could go on. There's a long history, and then I briefly got down to where they ended when the Romans finally, put them out of their misery and ended their kingdom. But chapter 11 is filled with detail about that, and we talked about that. And then chapter 12, verse 8, and we talked about this last week, but I'm going to say it again. I heard, but I did not understand. And I said, "Oh, my Lord, what shall be the end of these things?" And he said, "Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end." We're in the last days now. "Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked will do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he that waits and comes to the 1,335 days. But go thy way till the end be, for you will rest and stand in thy lot at the end of days." And you can take and figure out 1,290 days, and you can take and figure out a little bit longer, but there's going to come an end. And a time and times and half a time gets you so far. That they're saying that there's going to be this time. Remember that it's in the middle of the 70th week that the Antichrist breaks the covenant with Israel and he attacks them. All of this to be said is that it's the time of the end. But it's sealed up here in Daniel, and it ends. And then Daniel, shortly hereafter, he goes to be with his God and he leaves this earth. And this entire thing is picked up in the book of Revelation, along with a whole lot more than Daniel ever knew there could be. The revelation of Jesus Christ, how he deals with his body, the church, how he corrects and how he brings to pass the goodness of his will and his perfectness of his desire upon them as they just submit to him and call upon him. And when they refuse to do so, how there is judgment and correction because God's so merciful. And that's all there in Revelation. And then the revelation is shown and we see the end upon the people Israel. So there you are. The test will be, and it'll be sent out in email as well, but the test will be, give me 3 or 4 really good paragraphs. Take your time with it. Don't just rush. Sit down, think of your arguments, outline it a little bit first, then write out your argument. Show very clearly that somebody can understand where the Antichrist is coming from, what the visions of Daniel show. It's the first thing to learn. We love you all very much. We'll see you next week.